A, is that good? Oh, there we go. We were only dating, I would say, gosh, it was 2 months. So I was so excited. So I go walking into my bedroom, super excited, and there on my desk sat a plant. A plant. And I wish I could say to you, I was like, oh, that's the man I'm going to marry. But I was like, where are my roses? Yeah, it was a peace lily. I mentioned that to my husband, and he's like, well, we've lived pretty peacefully for the last 25 years. I'm like, So, but the thing is, I had expectations, and I think, a lot of women have expectations, I think, on Valentine's Day that maybe they're not met. But what we have in common with the disciples, we know we have a lot of things in common with the disciples, and we'll find out even more tonight, but they had certain expectations of what the Messiah was going to look like. So from this point forward in our book of Matthew, we see a definite shift in the direction. So we see that Jesus starts to clearly explain the plan that he has, the plan of him going to the cross. So he starts to talk very clearly to the disciples. That's why we see from today's reading, from today's scripture, Matthew starts saying, from that time on. So scholars believe this is about 6 months off from the cross, 6 months away. So from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the third day, and on the third day be raised to life. So what he starts to do here is he starts to frequently and clearly explain this to the disciples. In fact, in Mark 8:32, Mark specifically says he starts to speak it very clearly. So Jesus is no longer speaking in parables. He is like letting the disciples know this is what's going to happen from this point farther. So it'll be interesting as you continue to study Matthew, notice how much more clear Jesus becomes. But what we love about the disciples is that they still don't quite get it. And I'm so much like this, I think about this a lot. But I found this cartoon that I think totally illustrates these poor disciples. Bless their hearts. I used to live in Virginia. This is totally off subject, but it was still pretty southern Virginia. And my husband and I would always laugh because people would be like, well, you know that girl's just such a fool, bless her little heart. Or like, they would like wrap up these really like demeaning things, like really bad things. And then they just like make it sound real sweet by going, bless her little heart. So when I said, bless those disciples, I was like, oh, that's just like them. Anyways. Okay, so here's our cartoon. Here's my cartoon. Jesus is there, and the disciples say, you idiot, he said cast the nets instead of castanets. You get it? But thank you, that's a good laugh. I literally saw that at 5:30 in the morning, and I thought, I cracked up. I cracked up, and I thought, maybe I'm just really sleep deprived right now. And I think but that I think totally illustrates, as we kind of been journeying with the disciples, we see that they just don't quite understand sometimes what Jesus is saying. They come with an expectation that I think, well, we'll find out when we look and see what happens with what Peter says next. So Peter took him aside. So after Jesus says he's going to be killed and on the third day be raised to life, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. I mean, that's pretty bold. And Peter, we know he is a pretty bold dude, but I still started to think, now, Peter, how could you, can you just imagine that? It's like, he just says Jesus is the Messiah. He pulls him aside and says, no, that's not going to happen. So I'm like, what happened, Peter? What made you so emboldened? What made you so brave to speak so openly to Jesus? Well, remember just last week in that text you all studied, we were looking at, Jesus was saying, asking, what is everyone saying about me? Who do they think I am? Well, Peter, he asked Peter directly, he says, Jesus asks Peter, But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So I feel like Peter's feeling pretty good about himself because he got a question right? He got that answer right. So he's like, yes, I got something. You are the Messiah. So he's got this pride. And we've read, I think it's in Matthew, that we start to see how the disciples tend to vie for Jesus's approval. Like, I'm the best disciple. No, I'm the best disciple. They're always kind of arguing. So I just imagine Peter kind of being like, so, hey, John, who's the beloved one now, buddy? You know, like, I'm the rock. You know, like, you can just see that he's, I don't know, maybe I'm totally projecting my own pride issues on Peter. Could be. But the thing is he actually got the question right, but he still didn't get it. The disciples and other Jews, they really believed that the Messiah was going to destroy enemies, establish an eternal kingdom with Israel at the center, where Rome would be defeated and they would rule. So this is what they have pictured in their mind of what the Messiah is going to be. And Peter's expectation is so different than the reality that Jesus is teaching. So he's basically saying, your plan is not so good. That's not what's supposed to happen. I know what's supposed to happen. So if you think about these expectations, I think so many times when we're on our journey with Christ, we too will have certain expectations. We maybe will think, well, as long as I pray for my kids from the minute they're born, and pray for their spouse, and I go to Bible study, and I go do all these things right, well, then God is going to bless me with a good life. That's an expectation that we think it probably stems back to our whole idea of earning grace. And so we think, well, if we do everything right, things are going to be good. But that's not what it looks like. Our expectations need to sometimes be adjusted of what God might have, just what might unfold in your life, because we know that in this world there will be trouble. Jesus never promises us a smooth ride. He never promises, you follow me, we've got butterflies and unicorns all around. That's not the case, and we'll see that in just a minute. So we have these expectations. So Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, Peter had to be like, like, oops, got that wrong. So listen to this. This is so interesting. I find this so fascinating. So when Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, those are the same words that Jesus uses in the wilderness to tell Satan to go. So in Matthew 4:10, which we've already studied in the fall, we see that Jesus says, then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So when Jesus tells Satan in the wilderness, go, Satan, those are the same words that are used in this verse when he says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Peter was acting as Satan's pawn. In ignorance, I'm sure he wasn't doing it on purpose. He gave up everything to follow Jesus, so he loves him. Nonetheless, he was acting as Satan's pawn. He had set a trap for Christ that would undo his entire mission on earth. And that's what Satan's trying to do. He's trying to undo Jesus' mission on earth. This is fascinating. So listen to this. So Peter is called the rock, right? Back last week. You are going to be, Peter, you are the rock. You are going to have a significant role in the building of my kingdom. On earth, you're going to help propel the church forward. In fact, because of Peter's work, we're here right now, and we know Jesus. He was a significant rock. He was a foundation to our faith. However, what's happening now is Jesus is saying, you are being a stumbling stone. Now that is still a rock, right? He is still a rock, but it's out of place. It's in the middle of the road. He's still a rock, but now he's acting as stumbling stones. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, Peter, you're a rock, but right now you are allowing Satan to use you for something you were not intended to be. You're allowing Satan to cause me to stumble. You're a rock not intended to be used this way. So it's like, wow, how often do I allow Satan to use me as a pawn in his agenda? In this world right now, how often do I just, maybe not even knowingly, just walk along and allow Satan to use me as a pawn to block someone else, to be divisive instead of bring peace, to judge instead of love, to be bitter instead of forgiving, to worry instead of trust, to be apathetic instead of concern. And through my sin, I've been really thinking about this the past couple of weeks working on this. And through my sin, how often do I block the way of someone else on their journey to Christ? Because of sin I fall into or sin I choose. You know, I was thinking even about some, you know, I love Facebook for many reasons. I love Instagram because I like the pictures better. But, you know, sometimes when you read the comments of people on Facebook, and they're other beautiful believers that I love, but those comments can sound so mean. And it's like somehow they feel like what they say there won't quite matter. I don't know. But even like being so convicted, if someone reads something that you post who knows you're a believer and reads something that you said that's just hateful or mean, it's just, there's so many ways that you can start walking in the agenda of Satan in this world to pull people away from Jesus and cause them to stumble. Jesus tells his disciples, you are focused on concerns of this world and not on me. You are focused on what you want. Peter, you want the Messiah who rides in on the white horse and overthrows the government. I get that. You don't want the one who dies a humiliating death. But what I need you to do, Peter, what I need you to do is you need to keep focus on God's concern. And I believe in my heart, God's main concern is to bring his children back into relationship with him. And at this point in Matthew, Jesus knew the key to doing that was to die on the cross and reconcile God's people to himself. So he's saying, hey, I got to set up a new covenant that's full of grace and good news. Stop blocking my way. Stop tempting me. Go, Satan. I will not let you block me from doing what I need to do for my children that I love. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? So here what we're actually seeing is Jesus is expanding from what he said in 16:21. It was like Peter interrupted him. So he's saying, okay, this is what needs to happen. I'm going to die, and then I'm going to raise to life on the third day, and you need to also die and follow me. But I think a lot of times, I was reading, one scholar wrote that many people interpret cross as some burden they must carry in their lives. A strained relationship, a thankless job, and a physical illness. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard someone say this, but people will kind of say it with this self-pitying pride. They'll say, that's just the cross I have to bear. That such an interpretation is not what Jesus meant when he said, take up your cross and follow me. It's not what he meant. Because you guys, in the first century, the cross meant only one thing: a painful, humiliating death. So when Jesus is talking to his disciples, they know exactly what Jesus is talking about. 2,000 years later, when we're sitting here now, we recognize the cross. It represents forgiveness and grace and atonement and beauty. But back in the day, carrying a cross meant just carrying your execution weapon. So when Jesus tells his disciples that they have to pick up their cross and follow him, he's actually saying, you have to die too. And most of the disciples literally lost their lives. But I don't think that's what Jesus meant, that each one of us has to follow him to the death, a physical death. He's saying that in order to truly gain life, to gain the life he has for us, we have to die to the stuff of our flesh and of the world and stuff that just holds us back from what it means to be in true life with Jesus. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's this really amazing writer from around World War II. He died. His book, Cost of Discipleship, is phenomenal. It's really heady though for me. Whew, I can only read like this much at a time because my brain just does not follow his word. But one of his famous quotes is he writes, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die." We've heard that before. So what I think happens is our human mind thinks of death so negatively. So we think, if I have to die, that means there's going to be loss of fun. It's not going to be fun, or I'm not going to have financial success. I'm going to have to go to Kenya, or I'm going to have to, live in a hut the rest of my life, and I'm not going to be very popular. So we think it is just this awful thing. But Jesus is saying, no, you don't understand. You actually gain so much more. You gain so much more. You gain the fruit of the Spirit, peace, patience, goodness, kindness. You gain so much more when you actually die to yourself. And when you're willing to follow me, incredible things are going to happen. It's not always going to be comfortable. It might be a little awkward, but you will see the fruit eventually, if not now, but in another lifetime when you're able to sit, and we'll talk about that later. But you may not know, there's sometimes I feel like God will call me to do something weird, Michelle, stop here. I'll just be driving and I have this sense to stop and say something to someone. Because, if we go Jamie Winship, you're like, okay, I'm going to be ready. And you do it, and you don't necessarily get those Jamie Winship moments. You're like, well, that wasn't fun. Nothing exciting happened. But, you got to believe in that obedience. God is smiling. I mean, you listened, and that's all that really matters, is that you heard and you listened. I have a sweet friend of mine who actually was telling me that her son's team was in a ton of chaos. Parents are fighting. I think parents are the worst sometimes, but mad that who's playing, who's not playing. The kids are really jealous. There's a ton of it's just ugly. Ton of jealousy, tons of injury. So she said another mom asked her if she wanted to go pray in the team practice room. Well, this is a public school, so she's like, okay. And she said, I felt so led to do it. I felt like I was supposed to go do this because this team needs to know God. So they go at 8:30 at night, and my friend was she said, all the time, my friend was praying, Michelle, I just kept praying, please don't let the coach come in. Please don't let the coach come in. Please don't let the coach come in. And she goes, and sure enough, I look up, and there's the coach. And she said, it was awful. She said, Michelle, she's a lot like me. So when we get nervous, we start kind of talking a lot. And so she was like, I just started blabbing on about how we were praying for the team. And she said, he looked at us like we were crazy. Like we were nuts. And she said, well, I guess God's showing me I have to die to what other people think of me. And I think when she actually texted me that when I was working on this, and I was like, can I share your story? Because it's literally perfect for, she's like, sure. So anyway, so there is something, she was willing to pick up her cross, die to her reputation, what that coach was going to think of her, and she was willing to follow Christ. So sometimes, it's not to your literal death, But I do believe, regardless of how long you've been a believer, whether you've been a believer for 40 years or if you are just deciding to follow Jesus, I think it's important as a check to ask yourself, to follow Jesus, am I willing? Not that it's going to happen, but am I willing to lose some of my closest friends, to be alienated from my family, to lose my reputation, to lose my job, to feel awkward, seem crazy, whatever it might be for you, to have people, if you're concerned with what other people think, to really be able to be free from that. Are you willing to have other people judge you for following Jesus? But see what is happening here. You can see how this message to the disciples, what Jesus is saying, this is what's going to happen. There's this switch, and this is how you're going to follow me. This is what it means to be my disciple. So after 6 days, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Okay, so just a few side notes here. So Moses and Elijah, scholars, a lot of it is just speculation, but we know that Moses and Elijah both had some mysterious circumstances surrounding their death. Elijah literally just got taken up to heaven. Like, he didn't die. He just was like, whoop, like an escalator. Whoop. That's how I hope. That would be great. Just whoop, right on up. And Moses, he died, of course, but no one knows where he's buried. So it's interesting. There's some mystery. So it's interesting that it was these two figures that showed, that came to the mountain. Another thing that's interesting is we know that Moses and Elijah, Moses, of course, brought, if you studied with us last year, brought the law. He was a prophet as well, but he really represented the law to the Jewish people. Elijah was a prophet, but he was also kind of like the mediator of the law. So then you have, isn't this cool? So you've got Moses, who brought the law, Elijah, who is the mediator of the law, and then you have Jesus, who fulfills the law. And they're all there on the mountain, and these disciples get to witness this. Peter said to Jesus, I love Peter, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Okay, so who knows what Peter's thinking, but some speculate, scholars can only, really kind of look at this so much that maybe because the Festival of the Tabernacle was coming up, and he might have been thinking, well, let's not go back to Jerusalem. We kind of have our party here. Let's just stay here, and I'll get spots for all of you guys. The best translation is where he says, I will put up 3 shelters, as opposed to some translations will read, let us put up 3 shelters, because he's really saying, I will do it. And he would. Like, he'd just start getting the wood and let's get these up. But then what I absolutely love, and I didn't catch this till I was speaking at Birmingham, but if you look at the next line, he says, while he was still speaking, God just interrupted him. He's like, let's put up, let's do one for you. And then all of a sudden God was like, this is my son. He just Peter, just don't be concerned about the tabernacles right now. I think that's so funny. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. With a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. And I know Matthew was writing this to communicate that Moses and Elijah were no longer there. But I just love that verse. I keep thinking to myself, I just got stuck on that. What if I could live my life and see no one else but Jesus? Have that kind of focus. I know that's really not the context here, but I just kept thinking, they looked up and they saw no one else except Jesus. But Jesus is so gracious, Because, he could have just gone up on that mountain by himself and had that experience with Moses and Elijah. He could have, but instead he's so gracious because he allows Peter, James, and John to experience the Messiah they were expecting. Right then, he allowed them to see it. Okay, this is what you've been waiting for. Come on up. I want to show you this. They experienced the fullness of the Spirit poured over Jesus, the fullness of it. And this one scholar said, the heavenly glory of his nature, which was still concealed under his earthly appearance, now broke forth. It was almost like his human suit could no longer take it anymore. And it's just this glory of God just like busted out. And that's what Jesus got to see. Can you imagine? I don't even think as Matthew was talking to the disciples and getting this firsthand account, I bet they didn't even have words to try to explain it to Matthew. It was this incredible moment for them. Okay, this is where it's really hard for me not to judge the disciples, so I'm going to be real with you on this one. Peter, James, and John were the three disciples that went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Those were the three disciples that Jesus said, stay awake and pray or you'll sin. This is like 6 months later. What did the disciples do? What did those three disciples do? They fell asleep. Okay, 6 months ago, when it was the four of them, something big happened. So even just selfishly, wouldn't you be like, okay, stay awake because 6 months ago, I got to see Jesus in all his glory. But no, they fell asleep. The same disciples. But don't judge Michelle. That's what I felt like. I was getting all fussy about that. And then I was like, ooh, wait a minute. How many times do I forget God's miracles, his provision, his blessings? 6 months later, I'm in my own world, complaining about something else, forgetting about what he did 6 months for me, how he came through, how the person that I needed the most to called me, whatever the little provisions were that he has given me throughout my life, I forget. And I'm caught up in my worry, my mistrust, and I've fallen asleep. I lose focus and I fall asleep, just like those three disciples did. So Jesus starts from this point forward in Matthew to clearly tell the disciples exactly what is going to happen. I'm going to die, be raised to life. If you follow me, you're going to have to die too. You're going to have to die to all the trappings of this world in your flesh. The life I have for you, though, is filled with truth and light. And when you are focused on the concerns of the kingdom, you will see me in ways you never expect. But I love this line that I read. I must endure the cross before the crown. Before you get to see me in all that glory again, I have to go through the cross. So what do we learn through this? Because that message to his disciples, we are his disciples, and we can learn so much through what Jesus spoke to his 12. We know that God's greatest desire is for the world to know his love and be saved through his son's sacrifice. Focus on kingdom concerns. We need to focus on what is truly the most important thing for Jesus and for God. He sent his son, the son that he loved, to die for us. So we know that is such a kingdom concern. But remember, Satan wants to block God's desires with his own agenda. Don't allow Satan to use you as a pawn in this world. Remember, Paul says, it's in Ephesians 6:12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil. So what if you, when you're very angry at someone, maybe tomorrow on Valentine's Day, because they don't remember, and you're really angry, and what if you go, I'm not angry at you. You're just being a pawn right now in Satan's agenda. It's really Satan that is the evil one. It's really Satan. What if we start to see, instead of people that we're angry with, people that Satan has this plan to pull you further away from Jesus and also to pull those you love away from Jesus far away so that they never find him. So ask yourself often, are you willing to die for Jesus? To the selfishness, to the wicked desires, through pride, anger, bitterness, self-loathe, selfishness. Am I willing to lose friends, my reputation, my job, to follow him? And do I truly believe by following him, I am going to gain true life? Do I really believe that? I think they're important questions because knowing when we follow Jesus, we will have an opportunity. We will have that same incredible opportunity as Peter, John, and James did to see Jesus in all his glory. We will experience that. We will be in awe. We will see it, as John says in Revelation 19:11. I saw heaven. This is what, if you can imagine, this is prophecy that we believe we will see one day. And it reads, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Out of the mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh, he has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That is our Jesus in all his glory, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's what he says. That's what he promises, that one day when we carry our cross, when we die to ourselves, we will be able to experience him in all his glory. That is what we're focused on, because we want all those people that we love to be there, to see that. Because we know that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But before the glory, before the crown comes the cross. And we all need, as sisters together in Christ, to be united and pick up that cross and follow him. Let me pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you